Let's continue in our discussion about the Great Tribulation in Matthew chapter 24 and show that this already occurred in the first century. As we mentioned so many times already, Jesus said everything that would be listed and outlined by himself in this chapter would come to pass in a single generation. And that includes the temple destruction, not one stone being left unturned. All these things will be fulfilled before that generation would pass. And we have to keep in mind these contexts, all these things. It didn't say part of these things, it said all, and that stretches right back to the beginning of the chapter when they were asking him about these things, the buildings of the temple, and the time when it would come to pass. So the temple destruction occurred in that generation that saw everything else in Matthew 24. And if you look at Matthew 24, and you can't see how it fits with what happened in that generation, or if it was possible to happen in that generation, you need to go over that chapter carefully and understand, which I'm going to bring forth here in a few minutes. There were cultural understandings, idioms that were used, prophetic language that the Old Testament prophets often used that were utilized by Jesus Christ here. So let's go again to Matthew 24 and 21. Jesus told them there would be tribulation such as was not since the beginning of the world to that time, no, nor ever would be. And he began speaking of that in verse 15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Notice he's restricting this to the people in Judea. Why would the people in Judea have to flee to those mountains? Because then shall be great tribulation, such was as not. So if this was a worldwide tribulation, if Christians around the world were going to be going through a hard time, or in the case of the pre-tribulation people, if whoever is left behind was going to go through such great tribulation, why is Jesus restricting it to Judea and not the entire world? This tells us it was only in Jerusalem and Judea that these events were going to happen. And this is what people think is the rapture of the church, the coming of the Lord for the resurrection. As the lightning cometh out of the east, shineth even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And for wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. He's not talking about coming for the church. People have preached about the gathering of the eagles, and as the eagle gathers together, he's going to come and swoop and take his church away. No, this is talking about a place of destruction. The eagles are gathered where death is. Some versions actually say vultures. But that really comes to play when you go to Luke chapter 17. If you go to 24, as the lightning that lighteneth out of one part from under heaven shineth unto the other part under heaven, so shall also the Son of Man be in his day. So it's talking about the same conversation. But first he must suffer many things, be rejected of this generation. By the way, notice how he uses the term this generation. The people that were alive in his day. And notice this, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the Son of Man, the days of the Son of Man. Now people think that Noah was taken away and Noah escaped and the ones that were left behind were destroyed in the flood. That is not what Jesus said whatsoever. And the great left behind concept is derived from this passage. Notice the terminology very carefully. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat and they drank. Notice it's referring to a specific they. They married wives. They were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. So they are being contrasted from Noah. And the flood came and destroyed who? Them all. Now, when you go to Matthew chapter 24, you see the same discussion using Noah and so forth, and it uses slightly different terminology. And it begins with verse 36. Of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So a day, nobody knows. What's this day? Is this day referring to the resurrection? Is this referring to the so-called rapture? No. I'll prove it. As the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they, there it is again, were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. Now, them is not referring to Noah. It's just speaking of Noah singularly. Now, we know Noah and his family went into the ark, so he wasn't alone. But the terminology being used and the grammar and the tenses and so forth, the pluralities, the singular, it's all significant, and you can't bypass that. If you are writing about a certain they who are eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered in the ark, and then you say, knew not until the flood came and took them all away, you've got to realize that the antecedent for them, the term, the group, or the individual that them is referring to, is the same ones that were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. The flood took them, sinners, all away. The flood didn't take Noah away. The flood took the sinners away in destruction. And they knew it not. Now, Noah knew it. Noah knew the flood was coming. It didn't take him unawares. It didn't take him by surprise. He knew it was coming. So the ones that knew not until the flood actually came were them or they who were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. And that same scenario is a pattern and parallel to what it would be when the Son of Man's coming would take place. Then 2 shall be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. So notice the word taken. Who was taken in Noah's day? The flood came and took them all away. The ones that were eating and drinking, the ones that didn't know the flood was coming. So if it's a pattern, as it was in the days of Noah with the coming of the Son of Man, then the ones that are taken when the Son of Man comes aren't the believers taken up in a rapture. They're the ones that parallel those who were taken by the flood. You see, the flood represents Jesus. The flood came. Now, this is the coming of the Son of Man. Notice the 2 words, came in reference to the flood and coming in reference to Jesus, the Son of Man. The flood came like Jesus was going to come, and the flood took those sinners and unbelievers away into death and destruction like Jesus would come and in destruction take the one of the 2 in the field and leave the other. The one that was left in Noah's day was Noah. He was left alive. The one that was left in the coming of the Son of Man has to be the believer that's left alive. Praise God. And here, a whole series of movies, books, were all written based on an absolutely distorted understanding of these very verses, when it plainly shows sinners were taken and Noah was left behind. So, I want to be left behind if I was in this time frame. Praise God. Again, 2 women would be grinding at the mill. The one shall be taken and the other left. Who was taken in Noah's day? That's the way you can determine who it's speaking about when you read that the one of these women would be taken and the other would be left. And then he says, watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. And then he continues and emphasizes the destruction. Here's another parable that people have absolutely butchered. It says in verse 43, but know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come. Now remember, the ones in Noah's day knew not until the flood came. So it's talking about a time and an awareness of a coming. And here it's saying again, if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would coming. So the sinners didn't know the flood was coming, and they certainly didn't know when it would come. How could you know when it's going to come if you don't even know it's going to come? Noah knew. And the good man of this house doesn't know in what watch the thief would come. So that's what he's referring to when he says, you know not the day nor the hour. It says that good man would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be you also ready, for in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. So he's telling us that the thief isn't coming to steal away his church. It's been sung about. It's been preached about it. It's absolutely false. Look at this carefully. The thief was going to come, and where do we read? He's going to steal away anything. In this instance, we all know thieves steal. We all know thieves take things out. But when we read what the thief is doing and what Jesus focused on as an aspect of the thief that he wanted his listeners to be concerned with, that had to do with his coming, it's not the stealing. It's breaking up the house, destroying. It's like the flood, killing and bringing into death those people taken in death. The house would be broken up. It's not a time when the stealing is going to occur. It's a time when destruction is going to come. It's a time when the flood was going to destroy and kill. And so Jesus was coming in destruction. That's what it's talking about. And that's what it means. In such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. Now, when we go to Luke chapter 17, verse 26, this really brings it out. That's what's so wonderful about all of these gospel synoptic accounts that parallel each other. It helps you narrow down what it's really talking about. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the Son of Man. Days of the Son of Man, they did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that, on the other hand, Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all, the sinners. And likewise as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, and they planted, and they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and what? Destroyed them all. It's talking about a coming of destruction. There's nothing here about a rapture of the church whatsoever. Whatsoever. Even thus shall it be in this day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away, but let him that is in the field, let him likewise not turn back. Now, if this was the rapture, why would Jesus need to tell people, when the rapture takes place, if you're on the housetop, don't go back down. You're not going to have time to go back into your house and get your belongings if the rapture takes place. You see how nonsensical this is? You don't see it in that pattern in Matthew. But Luke talks about the same conversation, adds components that Matthew didn't mention. Luke mentions things. Matthew mentions things Luke didn't mention. You put it all together to get the picture. And then he says, remember Lot's wife. Now watch what these disciples say in a moment. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it. What happened to Lot's wife? They were fleeing out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And she looked back, and she was destroyed. She turned into a pillar of salt along with the sinners. It's talking about destruction. Get out of there and don't even look back. If you seek to save your life, you're going to lose it. Whoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. You see, it's talking about destruction. It's not talking about the rapture. In that night, he says the same thing as in Matthew. 2 men in one bed, one shall be taken, the other left. 2 women grinding together, the one shall be taken, the other left. 2 in the field, so forth and so on. Now, here's the kicker. In verse 37, they answered and said to him, where, Lord? Now, where what? What were they referring to about where? The taking. Where would they be taken? It keeps on referring to those that were taken in Noah's day, taken the 2 in the field. And so where are they going to be taken? Now, if this was the rapture, we should read something here about taken to glory. We should read something about taken to paradise, taken to heaven. That's what it's supposed to be about, taken, and you don't want to be left behind because you won't be taken to heaven. Well, let's see what he says. He gives them the answer of where. He said unto them, wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. The body, the dead carcass, the heaps of slain people. That's where these eagles are going to be gathered together. And as I said, many references read it as vultures and so forth. So let's go and talk in our next message about the sign of the Son of Man in heaven and really see how, though you might not recognize it as having been fulfilled in the first century, The Bible interprets the Bible. You've got to go to the rest of the Bible, which unfortunately futurism and dispensationalism hardly ever does. You'll see that in our next lesson.